Welcome back to another episode of Enterprise AI News. I'm your host, Troy Angradon, and I'm here with my co-host, Ian Wilson. How you doing, Ian?
Good. How are you, Troy?
I'm good, thanks. So what are we talking about today?
So today we're going to talk again about a little bit about AI ethics and regulation. And we've had a few chats about this, and it keeps coming around because it's in the press a lot. And in particular, when we talk about it being in the press a lot, this is an article that jumped out at me because I thought, wow, that's a bit scary. AI bias caused 80% of Black mortgage applicants to be denied. Obviously, a story from the US that has obviously lots of issues to deal with in this area. But what caught my attention particularly is I read through this article and there was no mention of AI bias. There was no mention of AI at all. I thought, well, wait a second. The title says AI bias caused 80% of these applicants to be denied. So where is that? Because it wasn't in the article.
Mm-hmm.
So then I found the article linked to a different article. So I thought, okay, well, I'll click through to that one and see what that's talking about. And this one says the secret bias hidden in mortgage approval algorithms. Now you'll notice here, we've dropped AI. AI suddenly disappeared and it's become algorithm. Okay, semantics, it's close, but I read this because obviously this is something I've heard before, and it seems like it's an issue that's been around a long time, and obviously something that needs to be addressed. But for me, obviously, I'm interested in the AI angle because I want to know what's happening there, what are the issues. And I read through this article, and what I found is because I want to know what are these algorithms you're talking about?
Right.
Surely they're credit scoring algorithms at banking, but how would you know that? Because the bank's not really going to tell you. So I was curious and I read the article through, and what it says, holding 17 factors steady in a complex statistical analysis of more than 2 million mortgage applications, blah, 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 blah. That's where they found this information. Well, okay, what I think is really important here is we've got down from what turns out to be a bit of a gaslighting clickbait title to another title that's kind of pushing it a bit to a real study, which we can't actually see, but obviously has some disturbing results. But the AI has disappeared. And that's what actually was, the clickbait essentially to pull people in. And what we also see here is, if you're looking at 2 million mortgage applications, we don't know whether these applications were approved or denied by algorithms or by people.
Right.
This study has no idea. I couldn't actually find the study.
But let me be clear. So Forbes writes a thing that blasts in bold letters: AI bias declines 80% of Black mortgage applicants. Then that points to another page on AP, which is not, a bastion of peer-reviewed greatness either, which basically points to a study, and you can't find the source study. And it's unclear of the 2 million applicants. I mean, how many mortgage applications are currently being run by AI right now? I don't know. I don't know if you know. Who knows? But it sounds like most of the studies.
They're all brand new and they won't be available. They won't be in any historical data because, that if they're being done, in the last couple of years, and that data's almost not likely to be available. Even with this study, one of the factors that the banking authority complains about is this study doesn't look at credit scores as one of its factors. That's by the by. But what's important here is there are real issues that this clickbaiting is actually muddying. And if you were like me and actually read through this, you would feel like you were being gaslighted, that, that's not real. Although you can see that, there are real issues here. So you don't need that AI clickbait here.
Right.
There's a real issue just with the data. And, stick with that. Don't use this AI ethics as a way to just use clickbait, which actually ends up muddying real issues. And beyond that, there are real issues to deal with for what's in the future with AI. And there's real work being done. And that also gets somewhat muddied or obfuscated by articles like this. So
Right.
these kind of articles really disturb me.
It drives me crazy, and because I see this all the time in any domain that I know well, and I'm sure you see it as well, especially this echo chamber game of telephone thing where one article points at another article, but gives it its own slant and its own editorial tone. Well, in some cases like this, almost inventing a complete story and then says, hey, go look at the source. You look at the source is not any better. It says, go look at another source. And it's a game of telephone all the way down to the bottom. And when you look at the bottom, there's nothing there. That's one issue. I think the second issue is
Yeah.
there is significant racial bias. There are significant, many different kinds of biases, age bias, race bias, et cetera, all of which are both in human rules-based algorithms, which, those are still algorithms. They're just
Mhm.
rules-based selection systems, as well as in newer model-trained, algorithms, as you and I know. So yes, we have bias everywhere. Humans are the worst offenders, our own systems, our own rules. So we have that everywhere. And that's a real conversation we should be having and finding and fixing those problems, bringing them to light. I agree with you that Forbes blasting this out that it's an AI bias problem is not serving anybody's needs.
Yeah.
Neither
So
the
that I think brings
applicants or
on
anybody
to
else.
looking at what is actually happening. So I've been having a lot of conversations actually around this area recently, particularly looking at things like how standards are used throughout the world and how AI standards are going to be put in place to look at a lot of the regulation that's happening. Now, this is the real work that's happening. Looking at, for example, here's an article from payments.com, Commerce Department's NIST unit seeks comment on draft AI rules for the finance sector. And they've got a whole document that's here, 23 pages, that are looking at risks and trustworthiness, looking at accuracy, reliability, robustness, resilience, explainability, interpretability, privacy, safety, managing bias, which is one of the articles, but it's the one that gets all the press.
Right.
You can see here, it's only one article.
Right.
Fairness, accountability, transparency. For me, that's the key one, is actually transparency. But this is where the real work is. This
Right.
is the real where the rubber hits the road.
Yeah.
And I think this is important for people to understand that this is going on. That's in the US. I look at Europe's AI Act that's going through its regulatory process right now, contains powers to order models destroyed or retrained.
That's really interesting.
I don't think that's gone through yet. I think this is jumping the gun a bit, but I think that's in the order. And so this is showing with that regulation, not only is regulation going through, but Europe's putting some teeth behind it. How that works out in the wash, we'll have to see.
Right.
But that's an area that I'm getting increasingly involved in. In the US, I saw this recently, the US Department of Commerce appoints 27 members to the National AI Advisory Committee, which is called Niacc. So I watched their first inaugural meeting, and they'd got 27 people from various places. Great to see my friend Keith Stryer, who I've chatted to in London from NVIDIA. Incredibly smart guy working with lots of governments around the world to craft their AI regulations and policies. So it looks like they've got a good crowd. But I think here's what I find is the critical point about this regulation that a lot of people don't seem to understand is this regulation is ideology. It's ideology. Now, that seems very strange to talk about regulation or standards as ideology. But what you're doing here, when we're putting in regulations, we're saying what can and cannot happen. What we decide can and cannot happen. And what's important to understand is who's deciding that? It's actually not transparent. It's not democratic. It's happening in groups kind of behind the scenes. So, a lot of smart people here, but these are the people that are actually deciding these standards. And those standards are based on ideology. And this becomes actually no different to what's happening in China, which is where they're regulating, and their regulations are essentially a reflection of their ideology. So Europe's regulations will be a reflection of Europe's ideology.
Right.
The US's regulations will be a reflection of, well, these people's ideology.
Right.
I'm not slighting anybody. I'm sure their ideology is wonderful and great, but it's important we all understand that. And actually, we should all be getting involved in that because this is quite critical. It's not something that can be done in backrooms where you think, oh, well, it's just a standard being worked out somewhere and some techie guys will figure that out. This is actually pretty critical. So understanding and keeping track of these things, I think, is something we all should be doing, especially if we're involved in the field of AI or at least interested in it. So getting involved in something like Niacc, getting involved in the EU's framework, which I'm also making sure I'm keeping up to date with what's happening in the UK and around the world, it is really important because that's essentially codifying ideology into regulations that will get built into AI models. And those things will drive our businesses, our governments, our education system, and they won't be really accountable ones. So it's important to understand what's going on right now. And this, I think, is where the AI ethics, bandwagon industry, whatever you want to call it, actually becomes real world work in real governments with real people making real standards and real regulations. And this, I think, is, I wish the AP and Forbes would be reporting on something like this.
That's the boring hard work of people trying to solve the problem, as opposed to them being able to trumpet about the problem to attract eyeballs, right?
Exactly.
Advertising revenue. So
yeah,
hard to fault them for their business model.
Smart people doing smart stuff.
What's that?
Who wants to report on a bunch of smart people doing smart stuff?
No, nobody. It's not going to get any eyeballs. Whereas AI bias causes 80% of that, mortgage applicants to, suddenly you're angry and you want to go pick up the article and suddenly they made 12 cents on their ad, right? So that's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. Clearly these are real issues we're talking about. Like none of this is to, one, say that, let's say AI bias or AI racial bias doesn't exist. It does. We've got lots of evidence for that. Two, I don't think this is about apologizing for AI and saying AI is never wrong or algorithms are bad. I don't think either of us would be apologizing for that, because we know they're made by humans and they're made by training and they have failures and they have mistakes in them. That's no surprise. Yeah. Interesting articles. I think that's it for today. So, do like, comment, subscribe, share, all the usual things. And Ian and I will see you on the next episode.
Yep. Be interested to hear your comments on this one.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye-bye.